At the edge of a shattered German town, an American soldier disappeared behind a prison column just as rifle fire broke across the road. And when the guards reached him, they found a German officer standing over the wounded man with his own coat pressed against the blood, while a second prisoner fled toward a burning truck carrying something that could expose why the ambush had begun, and why Eisenhower's name was already written on the order hidden inside it. In March 1945, Lieutenant Daniel Mercer escorted 40 German prisoners through the ruins outside Remagen, where engineers were reopening a road for Allied convoys. The prisoners carried tools, while their senior officer, Captain Ernst Keller, translated the guards' orders and kept the column moving between damaged houses. A military truck blocked the next intersection with one rear wheel buried in rubble. Mercer sent 2 guards to help the driver, then ordered the prisoners against a stone wall while engineers cleared broken beams from the road. Keller noticed that the truck carried no unit markings and that its driver wore new boots without mud. Before Mercer could inspect the vehicle, a shot struck the wall above the prisoners and scattered stone across the road. A second shot came from an upper window, and the guards pushed the column toward a courtyard while the driver abandoned the truck and ran behind a warehouse. Mercer followed him through the gate, but Keller saw a thin wire stretched across the entrance and pulled the lieutenant backward. The wire released a stack of roofing tiles that crashed into the passage, blocking the guards and separating Mercer from the rest of the escort. 2 armed men emerged from the warehouse wearing German civilian coats over American trousers. One raised a pistol toward Mercer, while Keller stepped between them and knocked the weapon aside with a wooden tool handle. The shot struck a fuel can beside the truck, and flames spread beneath the cargo bed. Mercer fell when a piece of metal cut his thigh, and Keller dragged him behind a low wall before pressing his officer's coat against the wound. The second attacker escaped through the rear yard with a leather dispatch case, while one prisoner, named Otto Brandt, ran after him without permission. The guards reached the courtyard and found Keller kneeling over Mercer, which made several rifles turn toward the German officer. Keller raised both hands but refused to remove the coat from the wound until a medic arrived, while Mercer ordered the guards not to fire and pointed toward the burning truck. Engineers pulled 3 wooden crates from the flames and discovered American medical labels covering German ammunition markings. Inside the cab, they found a forged transport order carrying General Eisenhower's printed authorization and a route leading directly to a forward hospital. Brandt returned alone with burns on one sleeve and claimed the fleeing man had crossed the river. A guard searched him and found a brass key from the stolen dispatch case, which made the prisoners suspect that Brandt had been part of the ambush rather than a man trying to stop it. Mercer was carried to a field station, while Keller and Brandt were placed in separate vehicles. The forged order was sent to Allied headquarters, where Eisenhower canceled the next convoy on the route and ordered both German officers brought before him before anyone destroyed the remaining evidence. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. Eisenhower questioned Keller first inside a mobile headquarters outside Spa, where the forged order lay beside maps of 3 hospital routes. Keller identified the ammunition markings as belonging to a German depot abandoned weeks earlier, but he denied knowing how the crates had entered an American truck. Brandt entered underguard and accused Keller of arranging the attack to gain Allied favor. He claimed the captain had selected the road, delayed the column beside the warehouse, and signaled the shooters by raising his hand when Mercer approached the truck. Keller answered by asking Eisenhower to examine Brandt's burned sleeve. The cloth carried black sealing wax from the dispatch case, proving that Brandt had touched it before returning, while the brass key bore fresh grease from the truck's ignition rather than dirt from the riverbank. Eisenhower ordered military police to search Brandt's barracks records and sent a patrol back to the warehouse. The patrol found a hidden cellar containing blank travel permits, American fuel coupons, and a radio tuned to an Allied logistics frequency. Before the items could be cataloged, The radio transmitted a coded message naming another hospital convoy due to leave within an hour. Eisenhower stopped that convoy and replaced it with an empty truck guarded by plainclothes military police. The decoy reached a forest checkpoint, where two men in American uniforms waved it toward a side road. Military police arrested one man, but the other escaped on a motorcycle after throwing a satchel beneath the truck. The satchel contained a timed charge and a list of prisoner names, including Keller's and Brandt's. Beside Keller's name appeared the word remove, while Brandt's name carried a payment figure and the address of a farmhouse near the Belgian border. Brandt tried to seize the paper during the evidence review, knocking a guard into the table and reaching for the door. Keller blocked the exit with a chair, allowing military police to restrain him before he reached the parked vehicles. Eisenhower sent a team to the farmhouse, but they found it empty except for recently burned documents and a photograph showing Brandt beside an American supply clerk. The clerk was identified as Corporal Mason, who had processed the forged truck order and vanished that morning. A telephone call then reached headquarters from the field station treating Mercer. Someone wearing a medic's coat had entered the ward, disconnected the lieutenant's telephone, and left a message beneath his pillow ordering him to change his statement before midnight. Eisenhower moved Mercer under guard and placed Keller in the adjoining room, not as a prisoner, but as the only witness who could identify the German ammunition system. Brandt was transferred to a secured cell, while a search began for Mason inside the Allied rear area. The escalation changed the case from a roadside ambush into an organized operation using American paperwork, German explosives, and prisoners as disposable witnesses. Eisenhower ordered every convoy authorization checked by hand, knowing the next forged order might carry his name again and reach its target before the deception was discovered. The convoy review uncovered 7 forged authorizations issued across 3 weeks, and 2 trucks listed on those papers had never reached their destinations. One carried surgical supplies, while the other transported penicillin intended for a camp holding civilians with severe infections. Eisenhower redirected investigators to a rail yard where both trucks had last been recorded. Keller accompanied them under guard because the recovered depot codes used abbreviations known only to German quartermasters. At the yard, Keller recognized chalk marks on 3 freight cars as old Wehrmacht inventory symbols. When engineers opened the first car, they found the missing medical crates hidden behind sacks of coal, but the penicillin boxes had been packed with ordinary water bottles. A rail worker tried to leave through a maintenance tunnel after seeing the search begin. Mercer, walking with a cane despite orders to remain in bed, identified him as the false driver from the ambush and followed military police into the tunnel. The worker released a freight wagon on the sloped track, sending it toward a passenger train filled with wounded soldiers. Keller climbed onto a switching platform and pulled the manual lever while Mercer signaled the engine crew to reverse. The wagon moved onto an empty siding and struck a buffer without reaching the passenger cars. During the diversion, the worker escaped through a drainage opening, but he dropped a notebook containing delivery times and the name of a civilian clinic waiting for the stolen medicine. Eisenhower sent the recovered penicillin from another depot by aircraft, yet bad weather forced the plane to land 20 miles from the clinic. Mercer organized a jeep convoy, while Keller translated road signs and directed drivers around a destroyed bridge. The medicine arrived before the clinic exhausted its final doses, but the delay had already caused several patients to worsen. A doctor handed Eisenhower a list of those at greatest risk, turning the theft into a consequence that could no longer be treated as missing property. Investigators traced the water bottles to an American bottling plant contracted by Mason. The plant manager admitted filling false medical crates, then revealed that Mason planned to exchange the real supplies for gold held by a retreating German unit. Brandt was brought to identify the meeting location and offered information only after demanding release. Eisenhower refused the bargain, But Keller recognized a church drawn in Brandt's notebook and directed patrols to a valley crossing near the Luxembourg border. The patrol found the exchange site abandoned, with tire tracks leading toward an old quarry and blood on a discarded American jacket. Inside the pocket was Mercer's unit badge, planted to make the missing lieutenant appear involved in the theft. Eisenhower ordered Mercer confined to headquarters until the accusation was resolved, creating the operation's first major consequence for the soldier Keller had protected. Keller was returned to a guarded room, while Mason remained free with the stolen medicine records, the gold, and enough forged evidence to turn Allied investigators against one another. The case reversed the next morning when a British signals team decoded the radio messages recovered from the warehouse. The transmissions had not originated inside German territory, but from an Allied communications truck assigned to Eisenhower's own headquarters convoy. Military police sealed the vehicle park and inspected every radio set. They found a hidden transmitter beneath the floor of a maintenance truck driven by Sergeant Cole, the investigator who had first accused Mercer after the unit badge appeared at the quarry. Cole tried to destroy the transmitter by pouring fuel into the compartment, but Keller recognized the smell and pulled an alarm before the engine started. Guards removed Cole from the cab and recovered a packet of unused forged orders inside his tool chest. The packet included a transfer instruction for Keller, scheduled to take effect that afternoon. Its destination was an abandoned holding camp, and the assigned escort names belonged to soldiers killed months earlier. Eisenhower canceled the transfer and confronted Cole with the radio codes. Cole admitted helping Mason move stolen cargo, yet claimed Mason had threatened his family and was now holding them inside a country estate near the border. A rescue team entered the estate through a service tunnel marked on an old German map supplied by Keller. They found Cole's family unharmed in a locked pantry, but the upper rooms contained printing equipment, American seals, and photographs used to copy Eisenhower's signature. Mason escaped before the raid by joining a refugee convoy. His abandoned desk held a ledger proving that Brandt had recruited prisoners to identify German depots, while Keller had been marked for death because he had refused to provide civilian hospital locations. Brandt's earlier accusation collapsed when investigators compared the ledger with his brass key and burned sleeve. Mercer's planted badge was also traced to Cole, who had removed it from the lieutenant's spare jacket during treatment. Eisenhower released Mercer from confinement and placed Keller under formal witness protection. The German officer was no longer treated as the suspected organizer of the ambush, but as the man whose refusal had forced Mason's group to expose itself. A final entry in the ledger revealed that Mason had reserved a seat on a military evacuation train, leaving that evening under a false chaplain's name. The train carried wounded soldiers, displaced children, and sealed diplomatic mail. Eisenhower ordered the station watched without stopping departures, because a visible raid could cause panic or push Mason into the crowd. Keller studied the false identity photograph and noticed that Mason had altered his hair but still wore the same unusually polished boots seen beside the first truck. Mercer and Keller entered the platform separately as passengers boarded. For the first time, the German officer moved without a guard beside him, while Eisenhower watched from the operations room and committed the entire case to a plan that depended on the former prisoner identifying one man among hundreds. Keller spotted Mason near the rear carriage carrying a medical bag and wearing a chaplain's coat over his polished boots. Mercer moved toward him through the boarding crowd, while military police closed the platform exits without raising an alarm. Mason saw Keller's reflection in a carriage window and boarded before the final whistle. He locked the connecting door, left the medical bag beneath a seat occupied by wounded soldiers, and climbed onto the exterior step as the train began moving. Keller opened the bag and found forged passes surrounding a metal timer wired to two sealed containers. He called for the passengers to move forward, while Mercer crossed the roof from the next carriage because the locked door blocked the interior passage. The train cleared the station and entered open country before engineers could reach it. Keller separated the containers from the timer, but discovered that cutting either wire would complete the circuit, leaving removal as the only safe choice. Mercer reached the rear platform and confronted Mason between the moving carriages. Mason struck him with a metal tool and tried to jump onto a maintenance path, but Mercer caught his coat and held him against the railing. Keller carried the bag through the emptied carriage and reached the rear door, where he saw Mercer losing his grip. Instead of throwing the device immediately, he secured Mercer with a luggage strap and pulled both men inside as military police entered from the adjoining car. An engineer shouted that the timer had less than 1 minute remaining. Keller and Mercer carried the bag to the final baggage platform, released the coupling safety chain, and pushed an empty luggage cart containing the device onto the track behind the train. The explosion occurred after the train passed a stone cutting, damaging the abandoned cart without reaching the carriages. Mason was restrained, and the sealed containers were later identified as stolen chemical igniters intended to burn the diplomatic mail and destroy the passenger train. At headquarters, Mason signed a statement after investigators presented the ledger, transmitter, forged seals, and testimony from Cole and Brandt. His confession identified the remaining supply clerks and civilian contractors involved in the network. A military tribunal convicted Mason and his American partners, while Brandt faced separate proceedings for conspiracy and attempted sabotage. Mercer's record was cleared, and the false authorizations carrying Eisenhower's name were preserved as evidence rather than quietly destroyed. Keller received no special release, because his status remained governed by prisoner regulations, but Eisenhower ordered that his actions be entered into the Allied record and sent to the authority responsible for his captivity. He also directed that Keller remain separated from Brandt's associates during transfer. Before Keller left headquarters, Mercer returned the German coat that had been cut apart for bandages after the roadside ambush. The sleeve had been repaired with American cloth, and the lieutenant placed his recovered unit badge inside the pocket. Eisenhower signed the final order in front of both men, permanently clearing Mercer and protecting Keller's testimony from removal. The train carrying the German officer departed under ordinary guard, but the written record could no longer be altered, buried, or replaced by another forged page. Several months later, Mercer stood beside a repatriation train and watched Keller climb into the carriage wearing the coat repaired with American cloth. Before the doors closed, an officer delivered a certified copy of Eisenhower's order, recording that Keller had protected an American soldier and helped stop the sabotage network. Keller placed the document inside his coat, then returned Mercer's unit badge through the window. The train moved without ceremony, while Mercer held the badge in his palm and Eisenhower's signed record traveled east with the man it had finally protected. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WWII stories.